I'd like to talk about consciousness in terms of number. I've already spoken about this, but I've had another insight that's changed the picture a little bit for me. Not so much changed it, but made it uh, take on a slightly different aspect. First of all, if we think about the idea of consciousness, what people mean by it varies greatly. Uh, but I'm not talking about the kind of consciousness that we have with our brains. That I consider to be a very limited form of consciousness. What I see consciousness as is structured thought on a rational basis. I think that's important. For a thought should have meaning, and that meaning should, in some way, be relational to something other than itself. Because consciousness is about communication between entities and elements that make up the background of consciousness against which thoughts are expressed. The thing about um, thought is if it's structured, if it has a rational basis, what is that basis? The only thing I can think of is mathematics, and in particular, the idea of number. The way I've seen it for a long time is that there is a trinity in mathematics of zero, one, and infinity. And I won't go into too much detail about that now, but I've seen that the idea of number there we in this consciousness of one, the domain of consciousness that we're in, there can only be one of anything because it's the consciousness of one. So uh, you can't have a pattern with just one. You need at least two to make a pattern. Two gives you a straight line, so on. It works that way. And so you need more than one. And to sustain consciousness, you have to have more than one element to communicate for a meaningful exchange of information. You can't have an exchange of information with yourself. So communication requires at least two elements. Now, um, of course, number in the singular is all there is, but in practice, in terms of the kind of hypothetical idea of consciousness, because if you look at the basis of all consciousness is the light, it's mathematically, we can call it oneness. Oneness is that which says everything belongs to itself. There can't be anything other. So for consciousness that is entirely contained of and within itself, with one meaning, basically. So the one's only got one meaning. How's that? For a profound idea. That what is that meaning? The meaning is one. It's oneness, and oneness is another expression for the idea of love. But here I'm not talking about love as some kind of emotional or sentimental. It's not sentimental. There's nothing sentimental about universal love, because essentially it sees things only for what they are. It doesn't add to anything. Now we're a bit different. We add value to everything, and this is, I'll go into this in more detail. But the one does, which is love in the unconditional sense, totally unconditional love, and it's not sentimental. So it wants to, it will only accept, permit, sustain truth. You cannot have anything in the state of love that is not true, not truth. Well, given the way the world is at the moment, so we've slipped up somewhere, haven't we? The shortage of love, but not truth. I mean, there's the truth factor means that there's an awful lot of shadow moving around, creating a great deal of mental and emotional and spiritual activity for no gain, because love only sees love. So if you're not putting out love in your life, then you're just a dark space. You're a black hole. You're not putting anything out. You're just taking in. So we have to put out love if we are going to register with the source of oneness, the state of consciousness or universal being that has allowed us to exist and created us, in a sense that we are self-creating, because if we weren't a part of the creative process of the one, we wouldn't be the one, would we? But we are. We're all aspects of the one, but we can never be the totality of it. On the other hand, we can't ever not be the totality of it. This is perhaps one of the first paradoxes. So let's take this idea of number and say, okay, so there's only number, and it has a value, or quality, I should say, not the value, the quality of oneness. And the quality of oneness goes with the value of one. So it's still the same one, but it's two different ways of seeing one. It's seeing one as an idea, and it's seeing one as a value. So we have, from the number one, we have a state of one being oneness, which is meaning and sensation, actually. And the other one is the one that is finite and a small part of the whole. But it's a small part of the whole that contains the whole, because it isn't a different one. It's the same one. So the one that is everything is the one that is part of everything, the smallest part of everything. So anyway, there we are. Now, what happens if we have two ones? We get the number two. and that has the quality of two-ness, and that two-ness is appropriate to any situation that arises where the factor of two, which is really one thing experiencing another version of itself. So that's how that works out. There's only one, but it becomes two versions of itself looking at those other versions and making comparisons based on the idea of oneness in the positive state, and the idea of separation from oneness on the other. That's, I won't say lower, but it's the negative state. And negative here is not the same as minus, in the sense that it's one side of something, negative. It's I have a handy diagram here. This is oneness, the white region, and this is nothingness, where nothingness is not oneness, basically. And in here we have one, here we have zero. So if we can say that this diagram, which is called the Taijutsu, at least I think that's how it's pronounced, I'm sure a Japanese person would improve upon it, but we have four versions of one idea. We've got the oneness as meaning, the one as unit, and we have the zero and its corresponding meaning of nothingness. Now, the nothing is not one. So it's not something that exists in its own right. It is not one. The zero is everything in yin and yang, as they call it, where you have an opposite. You've got, let's say you want to understand the concept of heat. So you need to experience its opposite, cold, in order to make sense of it. But cold does not exist because it's not heat. So this is what the light, this is how the light gets around the idea that it can create shadow versions of itself that cannot exist and yet do exist in the experience of the oneness, because the oneness is generating the shadow as an idea. It's imagining, if I didn't exist, this is what I would be. So what the light does is it pretends to be nothingness. And the difference is that the light is active, awake consciousness. The shadow is sleep, unconsciousness, somnambulism. It's the state of not being awake. But it doesn't mean you're not there to be not awake. Whatever it is that is awake is asleep. It's not a state of non-existence. There is no such thing as non-existence. So you can't ask what's outside the oneness. Oh, non-existence. Well, it can't be, because if everything is one, how can there be not one? But yes, There is. It's in what we call imagination. So that's what the one does. It conjures up an entire state of existence, a universe, and unlimited thought processes simply from the idea of something that doesn't exist. Sounds a bit like a Chancellor of the Exchequer. Anyway, so if we take one and we add it to itself, we get two, add it again, three, and so on. So all the integers do not exist except as an idea. There cannot be two or three or four or five, so on, because there's only one. But this is the useful thing, that if you say that there is one and that it can add itself to itself infinite number of times, there's no limit on the numbers that can exist as integers. But then because we think in terms of our 10 fingers or 4 fingers and 2 thumbs, we want to be pedantic. That means that these the 10, we think in numbers in base 10. And that's handy because it means we only need 0 to 9, and we can, as symbols, simply graphical symbols with no real meaning except as we ascribe it, we can create every possible number using 10 characters, basically. But there is no base 10 in the universe, in the infinite consciousness. It doesn't have bases like that, but it does calculate. It is mathematics. So it seems to me that the answer is that it's everything that exists that we can talk about has a level of complexity somewhere in its makeup where it is an individual. In other words, the number one applies to it. It is one. Now, we think a human being is a good example of one. You are one unit. Well, what does that mean in practice? Your identity, shall we say, is as a person with a name and a motor car or something, whatever it is, your life, your home, everything about you belongs to this one identity. But look how many parts you consist of. I mean, how many countless trillions of atoms are there, and subatomic particles? How many cells, how many organs, where we get into quantifiable areas when we start, 2 eyes, 2 ears and a nose, we're getting into the smaller numbers. But if you go from the high level down through the layers, and you're looking at your tendons and your veins, your cells. Cells have molecules, molecules have atoms, and then we go into the quantum field underneath. This all greater and greater detail, more and more parts to make up one whole. So what happens when we die, that level or dimension on which we are one no longer sits on top of the pyramid. It's a conceptual pyramid, not a literal pyramid. So it collapses. It disintegrates. So where your presence as a one, or the one gives you the presence of the source, is an equally valid way of seeing it, that holds your body and your system, your breath, everything, holds it all together. So death, brain death. Yes. Well, there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, you have to have these physical signs. You need to be able to work out when somebody's alive or dead. But the real change, the real difference, we can't see, because what it is that we have a unit, a one, a number one is holding us together as a complete entity, a total entity. It is your identity, but it's not you. So your identity is something else other than what you are, and yet it is what you are. This is it. It's all one. So anyway, there you go. When you die, your one ceases to be in your quantum digital pattern, replaced by a zero, probably. And so all your parts, all your molecules and atoms and cells all start fighting one another. And there you are. It's all, before long, it's gone. So when and if you get two people together, you're getting an example of two-ness. You get three people together, it's three-ness, and four-ness and five-ness. And the one thing all those things have in common is that, say, three people, I mean, if three people are part of a family, then the quality of threeness they experience is going to be completely different from the threeness between three rocks that have some form of association. Something holds them in a common situation. So the quality of threeness becomes applicable. That means that the number three, in terms of its meaning, is constantly being updated as new experience arises. And the experience arises here in the light, but it's created here in the light, in the shadow. The point in nothingness is the source of what happens in life, but the experience of it via the senses is here in the light, in the source. So that one is you, in your terms, but that's not really you. This is really you. But by having this, you're able to experience individuality as a version of the one. So if you look at it in terms of numbers, in terms of experience, everything is one on some level or other. If not, it's an invalid thought that need not arise. So everything is one is a mathematical idea, because in mathematics, which is based on the idea of number, and there are infinite numbers, and that the universe doesn't give each number a name. doesn't experience the number as what it is in itself. So you can't experience 5 because it's only 1. But if it experiences 5 ones and interprets the meaning of that 5-ness by whatever is going on at the time, in whatever situation it arises, then the quality of 5-ness is feeding on the number 1. But really, every incident of 5-ness is 5 ones. There is no 1 5. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody. So what it means is that the illusion of mathematical processing allows numbers to accumulate experience and meaning subjectively on the basis of objective processes such as thought, and it evolves constantly so that the one in its many guises can learn about itself and what the possibilities are that it can create by being many, but never anything other than itself. There is only one. Right. Hands up who wants more confusion. Thank you very much.